Good evening. So we'll start with a period of lightly guided meditation. So please go ahead and get in a comfortable meditation position. Starting by checking your posture, making sure nice and stable, balanced, upright, sitting in a way that your breathing happens naturally and easily. Face relax, especially your eyes, and bringing a smile to your lips. And take a few deep breaths. Just taking a moment to enjoy sitting still with nothing to do. No duties, no responsibilities, nothing you need to plan, nothing you need to analyze, nothing you need to come up with, nothing you need to figure out. For the moment, there's absolutely nothing whatsoever that you need to do. So you can just relax into this peaceful of not needing to do anything at all. For the moment, you don't even need to meditate. You don't need to do anything at all. Just enjoy this feeling of complete ease and freedom. And enjoying the feeling of the breeze against your skin. And gently bringing a sharper, clearer awareness to your own body. So this body is your own resting place, the place where you rest in the present moment. It's your home, your settlement. For the time being, this is where you rest your mind, within this body. and enjoying your body, enjoying the sensation of the body, enjoying the experience of being completely aware right here, right now, completely aware with nothing to do. If memories float through the mind, or thoughts, or ideas, or anything at all, just take no interest in it. It has no meaning to you, no relevance. It's like the sound of the children playing in the park. Distant voices that have nothing whatsoever to do with you. Nothing you need to take an interest in. So when thoughts and memories and emotions and ideas and images float through the mind, we treat them in the same way. Distant conversations that have nothing to do with us. Meaningless, full awareness of the body, still right, centered in the body. With every moment, enjoying the body more and more, perceiving the body as more and more pleasant. Keeping the mind very still, centered on a single point in the body. Sharpening and clarifying attention. Focusing the mind so it clearly perceives each moment. And fully enjoys each moment. Letting body and mind settle into bright, alert stillness. this bright, clear, peaceful awareness, recognize that everything in body and mind is constantly changing. All the sensations of the body constantly appearing and disappearing. Like a constellation of stars blinking in and out of being. And all the thoughts and emotions in the mind drifting, vanishing, dissipating, like clouds of mist in the sun. Nothing substantial can be found anywhere in body-mind. So let go of the perception of solidity and allow the mind to become aware of impermanence, the insubstantial quality of body-mind. So at this time I'll give a short talk, and after that I'll take any questions. I'll begin by paying homage to the Buddhas, so all the Buddhas, the past, present, and future. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ dhammāṃ saṅghāṃ namasāmi. Good evening. So, as far as I know, there's no set topic for this evening, which means it's up to me to come up with a topic. And one thing that came to mind as a possible topic that's worth talking about, worth emphasizing. So I was thinking about Samadhi practice. So Samadhi means mental unification or concentration, stabilization. So this is one of the very important qualities that we're trying to develop in Buddhist practice, is the skill of Samadhi. So Samadhi, particularly in the context of meditation, Samadhi is collecting together the mind, unifying the mind, stabilizing the mind, stilling the mind, while keeping sharp, bright, clear attention. And many people find this incredibly difficult. Many people find Samadhi practice extremely challenging. They find that when they try to unify and focus and stabilize the mind, that they realize that their mind is all over the place. It's constantly bouncing around. It doesn't seem to hold still on the meditation object. We're always getting caught up in thoughts and ideas and memories and plans and like all kinds of random stuff in our mind. Or we're getting distracted by noises or sensations or smells or any number of different things which might be distracting for us. Or one starts to get a little more relaxed and tranquil, and the mind starts drifting off into haziness and dullness and sleepiness. Or perhaps one starts wondering, what the heck am I doing here anyway? I could be at home watching Netflix. That would be so much better than sitting here listening to some boring monk drone on and on about things that don't really make any sense to me. You might be asking yourself, is this whole meditation thing, is this really the best way to train my mind? Maybe there's something else I can do to get peace and happiness. Something faster and easier, maybe available at your local pharmacy. Maybe there's a quicker way than all this mind training stuff. Or maybe skepticism about the Buddha, about the Dhamma, or about the monastic communities. So there can be a lot of noise in the mind, a lot of tendencies of mind which can make Samadhi practice very difficult. And sometimes there's even doubt about the usefulness of Samadhi. So enlightenment is itself a function of wisdom. Enlightenment is the culmination of perfect wisdom. So you might even be wondering, well, why should I bother with Samadhi practice? Shouldn't I just be practicing insight meditation? Shouldn't I just be trying to develop wisdom directly? It's another form of doubt that might appear in your mind. So I'd like to talk today a little bit about the supporting conditions for Samadhi, because this is usually why people have struggles with samadhi practice. It's usually less to do with the meditation technique that's being used and more to do with a lack of proper supportive conditions. So samadhi practice in terms of meditation technique is actually very simple, very straightforward. Pick something to focus on, put your mind there, don't move it. That's it. Really not complicated. Kind of like if this is your mind, that's samadhi practice. Not complicated. But it seems so incredibly difficult because we're constantly doing all kinds of anti-samadhi things with our mind all day long. That's why samadhi is so incredibly difficult for us. It's kind of like if you have a cup full of muddy water, or a jar full of muddy water, and you want the water to become clear, like you want all the dirt to settle to the bottom and the water to become clear. So you take your jar of dirty water and you set it down, and you wait for a second and it's not getting still, so then you start shaking it up. And you spend all day shaking up that jar of dirty water, and then you put it down and you're like, it's not getting clear. How strange. Maybe I'll shake it some more. And you're like, yeah, it's still not very clear. This Buddhism thing doesn't really work. Let's try that again. Nope, definitely doesn't work. Nope. And that's what we've been doing our entire life. Our entire life we've been shaking our mind around. So that's what we're used to doing. Our mind is constantly in this state of agitation and flux. And usually the only escape from that agitation that we know of is sleep, or dullness of mind. So samadhi is a state of mind which is completely awake, alert, and clearly aware, and yet is also completely peaceful and still. Which, if you've been doing meditation practice for many, many years, this might sound perfectly natural and normal to you. But if you're not so used to meditation practice, then this can sound quite strange. It can be quite unfamiliar. I remember when I was first getting into meditation practice when I was a teenager. And I hadn't been practicing for that long, but I started to have these moments of just like a few seconds. But a few seconds when I would stop thinking. I would still be awake, but I wasn't generating any thoughts. And this was amazing for me because as far as I was aware, my mind had been more or less continually active for as long as I could remember. And I remember I was talking to my brother and I mentioned the fact that it's possible to have a mind which is free of thoughts, yet is completely awake. My brother's answer was like, that's ridiculous. That's impossible. It's impossible for the mind to not be thinking, except when it's asleep. And even when you're asleep, you're dreaming. Like, well, it's impossible for you maybe, but that's because you haven't tried. You haven't created the necessary conditions. So the meditation practice itself, for cultivating samadhi, this bright, alert, peaceful concentration, the meditation practice itself is actually quite straightforward. So the technique that we were doing for most of the meditation period just now, focusing on your body. Very simple. Just put your mind in your body and hold it there. So keeping your mind steady through a sharp, clear awareness of your body. And if you do that, then after a while, the mind will unify into a state of samadhi. So this bright, blissful, serene steadiness of mind. So as I mentioned at the beginning, usually the problem is not so much the meditation technique that we're doing, but rather the supportive conditions in our life, or rather the lack of supportive conditions. So in Buddhism, in the Buddhist teachings, we find that there are a number of supportive conditions for samadhi practice, which are extremely helpful. One of the most direct is morality. So practicing kindness, practicing gentleness, consideration, self-restraint, not hurting anyone, including yourself, caring about others, practicing generosity, um, mm, avoiding things which blur and dull the mind, so not using intoxicants. So this creates a basic degree of stillness and clarity in the mind. It also means that one is less prone to remorse. If you haven't done anything bad, then you don't have anything to be remorseful about. If you've only done good things for other people, then when you start reflecting on your own behavior, you'll remember all the good things that you've done. In fact, the Buddha recommends that we consciously recollect our own good qualities, consciously bring to mind our own generosity and virtue, constantly remind ourselves of our own wholesome qualities. And that helps to create conditions for good samadhi. Another very important condition for good samadhi is practicing mindfulness and equanimity all day long. So mindfulness and equanimity are two very important parts of samadhi practice. So mindfulness is the sharp, clear, present moment awareness. And equanimity is non-reactive attention. So mindfulness and equanimity together are to be completely present for every moment of our life, every single moment of experience, without reacting to it. So this doesn't make you an inert blob, by the way, because if you're cultivating wisdom, then you'll also know to respond appropriately to conditions. But you won't be reacting blindly. So there's a tremendous difference between blind reaction and appropriate response. They're not even remotely similar. So upekkha, equanimity, is when you see clearly the experience that's happening and you recognize that it is up to you whether or not you react to it. There's no such thing as an automatic response. If a response seems automatic, it's because we weren't paying enough attention. It's because our mindfulness and self-restraint were not well developed enough. So if you do seem to be falling into automatic reactions a lot, well, that's a sign that you need to work on your mindfulness and self-restraint. It's a sign that you need to work on cultivating this quality of equanimity. So equanimity is, once again, to be clearly aware of every moment of experience without reacting with either desire or aversion. And as you practice with this for a while, it can be quite interesting because eventually you'll get to a point where, say for example, you step on a sharp object. You're walking barefoot and you step on a sharp object. And you remove your foot from the sharp object, but you realize that you never lost your peace of mind. You're like, oh, sharp object, remove foot. But you don't lose your peace of mind. As opposed to before beginning practice, normally you step on a sharp object and you're like, ow, that hurts. There's this reaction of disliking, this reaction of hating the sensation. So when one's mindfulness and equanimity is well developed, then as you're stepping on the sharp object, there will be an awareness that the appropriate response is to remove your foot from the sharp object. But your peace of mind will never be disturbed. Your peace of mind will not be broken. So you still do the appropriate thing, namely taking your foot off the sharp object, but you don't lose your peace of mind. So this is equanimity. Equanimity is also when you encounter something pleasant. And you're simply aware that there's something pleasant happening, but you don't become obsessed with it. So an example of this is, say you're walking down the street and you see somebody who you find extremely attractive. So before cultivating equanimity, you might find that your mind immediately jumps to that person and tracks their movement. So your mind gets immediately obsessed with that pleasant sight, that pleasant visual experience. But when your equanimity is well developed, the person will move through your field of awareness, but you may never even move your eyes towards them. Or if you do, it might just be a glance, just to acknowledge, oh yeah, there's a person over there. But you don't have that obsession of constantly craving that pleasant visual experience. And of course, the same goes for any other kind of sensation. So this is a practice then called sense restraint. In Buddhism, we talk about restraint of the senses. And apparently some people find this term sense restraint immediately unsettling. I've never had that experience since I first heard it. Sense restraint. I was just like, well, of course, sense restraint, why not? Some people, they hear this term and they get very uncomfortable just at the sound of it. But briefly speaking, the way the Buddha defines sense restraint is he says, when seeing a sight with the eye, one does not latch on to its details and characteristics. When hearing a sound with the ear, one does not latch on to its details and characteristics. In other words, you don't get obsessed with anything. So you see something and you know that it's there, but you're not particularly interested. You know that it's not particularly important. And if you do need to interact with it, then you just do what you need to do. You perform the necessary functions, but you don't put any extra mental effort into it. You don't put any extra obsessiveness or attachment into it. So sense restraint, you're still aware of everything within your sensory field, but you're not obsessing about any of those objects or any of those experiences. You just let them come and go in their own way without either pursuing or rejecting anything that appears within your field of awareness. So this also is a function of equanimity and a way of training the mind in equanimity. So this can be an interesting experience. If you do find, coming back to the earlier example of maybe you see somebody that you find attractive coming into your field of view, and you notice you have this impulse to stare at them, even just for a couple of seconds. Well, then you can remember, oh, but I'm trying to cultivate sense restraint because that's an element of equanimity, which will make my meditation much better. So then you restrain yourself from staring at that person. So you don't look at them for any longer or any more than is strictly 100% necessary. This doesn't mean that you ignore the person entirely or that you look away, though you might. If your obsession is very strong, you might actually need to physically avert your eyes. But it doesn't necessarily mean that. Rather, it just means that you don't give them any more attention than anything else. You don't give them any extra attention. And the same with, for example, when you're eating your lunch. You might be eating your lunch and you're like, well, I like this a lot. I like this mildly. I don't like this one at all. This one's great. This one's okay. So we start prioritizing everything and we start obsessing about the ones that we really like and kind of dreading eating the parts of our lunch that we're actually not so interested in. And well, here's a practice, which is to treat everything on your plate equally. So whether it's that incredibly bitter greens that you can just never quite seem to make yourself like, or whether it's that wonderful Italian gelato that you're always craving, treat all of it equally. Give it the same amount of attention, the same amount of time, and regarding all of it as good medicine to sustain your life. So not placing any greater importance on the ones you like or directing any hatred towards the ones that you dislike. But just see all of it equally as good medicine for your body. So appreciating everything on the plate equally. This also is a form of sense restraint. So sense restraint is, again, a way that we can train the mind in the factor of equanimity, which is such a critical part of samadhi, a critical part of good meditation. Another very important part of good samadhi is, and I bring this up all the time, and I know that nobody actually follows this, but I bring it up anyway, refraining from music. I really can't emphasize this enough, especially vocal music. So anything that has lyrics, avoid it completely if you can, completely avoid it. Even strictly instrumental music is better to avoid if possible. But definitely anything with lyrics, especially catchy lyrics, don't do it. One of the most common complaints that people make when talking about their meditation struggles is they talk about having music stuck in their head. How do you think that music got stuck in your head? It's because you keep sticking music in your head. So stop sticking music in your head, and there won't be any music stuck in your head. It's really simple. This is the easiest meditation problem to fix. If you have a problem with music stuck in your head, just stop listening to music. Problem solved. All that music in your head will fade away within a relatively short period of time. It can be as little as within a couple of days, but it might take longer. It might take a few weeks or a few months or a few years even. But it will fade. It will fade. Another very important quality of good samadhi is avoiding arguments. Especially silly or stupid or pointless arguments. But just as a general rule, try to avoid argument. And if you do need to have some kind of discussion which involves conflicting viewpoints, do so in as peaceful, serene, and gentle a way as you can. And without attachment to your own opinions. So entering into a discussion with a genuine willingness to relinquish your own opinions, if the conversation proves that that's the wise course of action. But during the conversation, again, do your best to keep calm, stay peaceful, keep your mind steady and serene. Recognizing that whatever the discussion is about, it's not worth disturbing your own peace of mind. It's not worth breaking your own peace of mind, your own happiness of mind. And actually just generally avoiding unnecessary conversation is extremely helpful for samadhi practice. Especially talk about frivolous things. So talk about the Olympics. Are the Olympics still happening? Or is that over now? Over? I don't follow the news, so I don't keep track of these things. Yeah, talking about the Olympics, or talking about celebrities, or talking about whatever silly things people talk about. I don't know. Yeah, just don't do it. Don't fill your mind with that noise. Again, if your mind is filled with noise during meditation, usually it's because you've been filling it with noise all day long. So your mind is just continuing to do whatever you've been doing with it all the time. So if you want to have a peaceful, alert, and joyful mind during meditation, then cultivate a peaceful, alert, and joyful mind all day long. And you'll find it much easier. It's actually amazing. I found there's a lot of meditation practitioners who have this real cognitive disconnect of they spend 30 minutes a day making their mind peaceful, and then 23.5 hours making their mind agitated. And then they wonder why their mind is mostly agitated. It's like, well, do the math. It's really not too difficult to figure out why your mind is so restless all the time. Or you spend 30 minutes practicing concentration and 23.5 hours practicing distraction. Why do you think you're distracted so often? Not too hard to figure this one out. Or you spend half an hour practicing mindfulness and 23 and a half hours practicing fantasizing and daydreaming. Again, why do you think you're so disconnected from reality? It's not too surprising, is it? It's not too hard to figure out. So if you want to have good samadhi, if you want to have good meditation, then you should be practicing meditation every single waking moment. And so that means bringing these qualities of mindfulness, of equanimity, self-restraint, sensory self-control, gentleness, kindness, quietude. So actually bringing a sense of quiet into your life, turning off your devices once in a while. It's actually amazing how lovely that is. So here at the monastery, I do have a phone. It's hard to get by without a phone these days. But almost all the time, it just sits in the office. So I don't even have it with me. So advance warning, if you do somehow get a hold of my phone number and you try to contact me, be ready to wait, because I will not reply quickly. And I actually may not reply at all, to be perfectly honest, but I certainly will not reply quickly. Same with emails. If you send me an email, get ready to wait. I might take a couple of weeks. Or I might just not reply. That's also quite possible. And why? Why is it worth pulling back a little bit from all of our interaction and engagement and busyness of mind? And the answer is quite simple. It's because all of that interaction and engagement, it might seem enjoyable to a certain degree, but what it's doing is it's constantly stirring up the mind. And it's constantly agitating the mind. It's constantly weakening our serenity, weakening our mindfulness, weakening our equanimity, weakening our samadhi. So of course our meditation is not so good when we're wrapped up in so much anti-meditation so much of the time. So yeah, bring these qualities of mindfulness, equanimity, sense restraint, kindness, gentleness, quietness into every single moment of your daily life. And then when you go to practice meditation, you'll find it much easier to enter deep states of stillness and joy. You'll find it much easier to cultivate this bright, alert steadiness of mind that we call samadhi. So I think that's all I have to say for the moment. So at this time, if you have any questions or comments, yes, go ahead.
How do you reconcile sense restraints with the place of the arts in human evolution, including some of the festivals in the Buddhist caves at Ajanta and Aurora?
So sense restraint and art, well, Buddhist art has a specific function. So Buddhist art is meant to support our Buddhist practice. So usually it's either inspiring imagery, so images of Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, of Arhants and monastics and people who they're meant to remind us of our ideals. Or sometimes they're teaching tools. So a classic example of this is the Tibetan Wheel of Life motif. That's a teaching tool which contains a tremendous amount of information packed into visual data. So Buddhist art, it can also be used as meditation objects. So one meditation technique is to stare at a Buddha statue. Some people find this an incredibly powerful meditation technique. So sit with your eyes open in front of a Buddha statue or a picture of a Buddha, and just gaze lovingly at it for half an hour. And your mind can become incredibly peaceful, joyful, and still, just through that simple act of gazing lovingly at an image of a Buddha. So Buddhist artwork serves a spiritual function, which helps us to attain awakening. And it also can be quite lovely, can be quite beautiful. And this helps you pay attention to it. Nobody wants to stare at an ugly picture. So normally, Buddha images look very peaceful and beautiful. There's something that you want to look at. And so, again, this serves a function. It's the same thing as, for example, enjoying the experience of your body. It makes you want to be present with your body. If you hate feeling your body, then mindfulness of the body is going to be very difficult for you. If you enjoy feeling your body, then mindfulness of the body is much easier. So it's the same. Buddhist artwork, yeah, it's often quite lovely to look at. And that's because you want something that encourages you to constantly direct your mind towards wholesome spiritual qualities. As for non-Buddhist artwork, again, some of it can be supportive to developing wholesome qualities. But let's be realistic, a lot of it is just distraction. It's just things that people do because they're bored or they're restless or they have a lot of ideas in their mind and they want to manifest it physically one way or another. And there's nothing inherently wrong with that. There's nothing inherently wrong with creativity. But it doesn't necessarily lead towards awakening. It doesn't necessarily lead towards peace of mind. It's just something that you can do with your time that's, morally, it's neutral, I would say. Creating art is morally neutral, depending on your motivation, of course. If your motivation is to help people develop wholesome states of mind, then creating art can be morally wholesome. If the act of creating art is a way of developing mindfulness and equanimity, if it brings up wholesome qualities in your mind, if you use it in that way, and I know some monks who do create art and they do so as a meditation practice, a way of cultivating mindfulness and alertness and serenity and joyfulness, and that's all fine. On the other hand, if you're creating artwork that stirs up desire, aversion, and delusion in people, that's not so good. In fact, that's unwholesome. That's bad karma. It's not something that we should be doing if we want to attain awakening anytime soon. Similarly, some people, the more they get into artwork, the more restless and agitated their mind becomes. So I remember once, many years ago, this is probably at least 10 years ago, I was in a meditation retreat, a long meditation retreat. And I started to have this idea for a story coming up in my mind. And it was really distracting me, like these characters and events kept appearing in my mind. And I was like, okay, I'm just going to go and write this down. And then I'll get back to my meditation. So I went and I spent several hours writing down the stories and characters and things and like laying out, starting to lay out the story on paper. But then it didn't make my mind peaceful. In fact, it had the opposite effect. It meant that then when I went to meditate, then my mind just got even more immersed in all the details and the possible directions the plot could take and how the characters could develop this way and that and other stories I could also come up with. And I realized that the more I fed that creative impulse, the more restless my mind was becoming. So I stopped. In fact, I tore up my manuscripts and threw them away. And that's the last of my creative writing. I haven't done any creative writing since then. Actually, before I became a monk, I used to do a lot of creative writing. It was something I quite enjoyed. But this experience made me realize that the more you encourage your mind to produce ideas, the more restless your mind will be. So ultimately, you need to ask yourself, what do you actually want your mind to be? Do you want your mind to be creative and artistic? Well, that's okay. You can do that if you want. Or do you want your mind to be peaceful? These are not necessarily compatible. They're not necessarily incompatible, but they're not necessarily compatible either. So the subject of artwork is something that needs to be approached with some delicacy within a Buddhist context. It's not to be completely discarded, but it needs to be handled delicately, or you can just wind up making your mind extremely messy. Okay? Does that help at all? Okay, any other thoughts, questions, or comments? Go ahead.
You talk about distractions like the phone, and you are quite disciplined about keeping the phone away. You don't realize, for most of us, how addictive the phone is. You have some simple ideas on how to reduce addiction to phone, newspapers.
So you're asking how to reduce addiction to phones and so on. Yeah, set clear boundaries for yourself and keep those boundaries. So here at the monastery, most days, I have access to my phone from about 9 or 9:30 in the morning until 11 in the morning. So this window of time, so during the monastery work period, when I actually have a good reason to have access to my phone because I need it for some of the administrative work that goes on here. I don't need it the rest of the time. Sometimes if I'm leaving the monastery for a period of time, then I'll bring it with me because it's useful. But most of the time I don't really need it. So I have it stored somewhere far away from me, far away from my room. So I don't have access to it. I don't think about it. I would have to put a lot of effort into going and getting it in the middle of the day. And why would I do that? So that's what I recommend, is setting clear boundaries. Like I will use my phone from this hour to this hour, but the rest of the time I'm going to have it stored somewhere far away where I would actually have to put some effort into going and getting it. I also recommend actually turning it off before storing it, because that will give you another little impediment. So the first obstacle is when you think about getting your phone and then you realize, oh, but I would have to walk all the way to the other side of the house. That would be inconvenient. And if you actually do walk all the way to the other side of the house, the phone is shut off and you have to power it back on again. That's just a little extra impediment. Yeah, really ask yourself, do I really need to have it all the time? So I remember when I was a teenager was when cell phones were just starting to become common. So they were still a pretty new thing. They weren't yet pervasive. So actually very few people had cell phones. When I was a teenager, cell phones shifted from being rare to being common. It was during those few years. So I still clearly remember what it was like when nobody had cell phones. And it was just normal that whenever you left the house, people couldn't contact you. Somehow, life went on. Somehow, we got stuff done. Somehow, everything was okay. So nowadays, we tell ourselves that we can't possibly go without having our smartphone with us 24/7. But that's clearly not true. So it's just a habit that we've cultivated, which means we need to actively cultivate the opposite habit. Actively cultivate the habit of not having your phone. So setting very clear, very tight restrictions and sticking to them. And I also recommend setting at least one day a week when you don't use your phone at all. So here at the monastery, Tuesday is our silent day, and it's also the day of no communications. So I don't use my phone at all on Tuesday unless there's, again, a critically dire reason, which there almost never is. So similarly, having days, maybe once a week is too often if you think you're busy, maybe once a month or something, but setting a day when you don't use your phone at all. And I'd also recommend not using the internet, not using any kind of communication device. A day when you can actually just be with yourself. Yeah, so you need to train yourself. If we just let ourselves do whatever we want, then for the most part we make bad choices. It's the same as with the precepts. The precepts are ways that we train ourselves to stop making really bad choices. So it's the same with, especially with our phones, but also with our other devices. We need to set clear boundaries and follow them. Okay. Mona, you had a question?
Yes, I had a question regarding equanimity. I was a little confused when you were talking about music and not recommending not listening to music with lyrics, but not even just instrumental. And I kept thinking about equanimity, and also you mentioning how that means you treat everything with the same attention.
Mhm.
Well, why would you exclude something then?
So in the case of music, so just for example, earlier today I was in Manhattan. And part of that meant hearing music. I wasn't seeking it out. It's just something that happens when you go into the city, is you might hear some music every now and then. So my practice was treating the sound of the music as being no different from the sound of the birds and the wind and the cars and the traffic and the people and all that. So trying to treat it all the same in my mind, not giving any extra desire or attachment or aversion or rejection towards anything that was appearing in the field of awareness. However, if you are actively seeking out music, then that indicates your equanimity is already broken. Because you're operating from a place of desire. You're operating from a place of attachment, a place of obsession. And you've already decided that you need music in order to be happy or to be calm or whatever it is you're trying to get from the music. So once again, that indicates that your equanimity is already broken. So that habit of seeking happiness or excitement or serenity or whatever through music, that habit is part of what keeps our mind far from true equanimity. So this is why it's useful to start weakening that habit. Okay? This tends to be a really disappointing one for people because people tend to be really addicted to music. I certainly was. Before I became a monk, I was desperately addicted to music. Almost every waking minute of my life, I was listening to music. I always had earphones in, or I was playing things over the sound system in my dwelling. Like almost all the time I was listening to music. And when I started getting into meditation practice, the meditation was one of the very few times during my day when I was not listening to music. And it's incredible what a difference that makes in the mind. Really remarkable. So if you're not ready to completely give up music, I mean, I don't blame you. It's delightfully addictive. By design, it's delightfully addictive. But try reducing it. And recognize the peace of mind. And try setting aside a day when you don't listen to music at all. And see what that feels like. You should also come on retreat sometime. So having a whole week where you just don't have any opportunity to listen to music or watch shows or use your phone or talk to people, it's really helpful. And you'll start to understand why this is so supportive to meditation practice.
The reason I'm asking is because it's like you say, sometimes I seek music, but sometimes I find myself that I forget about it. And I just don't do it. And I realize at some point, like, oh, the day has gone by and I didn't put on music.
Mm-hmm.
So I think there's a difference between like doing it on purpose and like how it happened that I just didn't need it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead.
Bhante, you must be aware aware that there are different types of personalities. Some people are left-brained, where they're analytical and clinical and mathematical and precise. And then others are right-brained people, where they are creative and musical or writers. And don't you think it would be much more difficult for a right-brained person to give up creating their art or writing, or maybe they write music? Maybe, wouldn't that be more of a hurdle for somebody with that kind of a brain structure?
Well, I mean, everybody has their own challenges and difficulties. So using the two personality types that you mentioned, so the left brain type and the right brain type, yeah, of course, the creative type is going to have a harder time giving up their creative pursuits, naturally. Well, the analytical thinker type is going to have a hard time giving up their analytical thinking pursuits. So that was more my struggle, giving up my insatiable desire to learn useless information and think about it all the time. And before I became a monk, I used to spend hours every day, like looking up random stuff on the internet, like things which weren't really useful to know. I just liked collecting information and thinking about things. So we all have our own particular obstacles and difficulties. So we just work with our own conditions. And it does vary a bit from person to person. And that's why we have so many different techniques in Buddhism, is so that whatever your particular challenges are, there are techniques that will help with those particular challenges. And it changes over time. So the difficulties you're having today, you might work really hard on it, and in a year or two, you've pretty much knocked that one out. But then you find that there's several others that are now more apparent to you, and those are the ones you need to work on. So Buddhist practice is sometimes analogized to the game of whack-a-mole. So you whack one down and pop, up comes another one. Whack that down and pop, up comes another one. But unlike whack-a-mole, I've actually never played whack-a-mole in my entire life. Does it ever end, or is it endless? Endless?
I don't know.
Oh, really?
Yes.
It's possible to beat them?
Possible to beat them.
Okay, great. Now it actually is a perfect analogy for Buddhist practice then. Because eventually, you do get to a point where the moles stop popping up in your mind. So you just keep playing whack-a-mole until eventually it all stops. And your mind is completely peaceful and joyful. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well maybe that's enough for the evening. So thank you all for coming. Tomorrow we'll have an afternoon meditation program from 1 to 4. So if you'd like to come tomorrow afternoon and join us for that, you're welcome to. So 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock. Of course, we have our live streams Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, as well as periodically at other times. Otherwise, just keep an eye on our schedule and join in as much as you can. So we'll end the evening with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.